All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started and welcome everyone to Samvera Virtual Connect 2021. My name is Heather Greer-Klein. My pronouns are she, her. And if you don't know me, I'm the community manager for Samvera. And I'm also part of the planning committee for this year's Virtual Connect. So I'm going to kick us off today. And I'm going to start with some housekeeping. So please note that this webinar has live closed captions available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded, and after the sessions today and tomorrow, we'll have videos available on the Samvera YouTube channel, and slides will be available in the Samvera Community repository. So attendees will receive links to both of those in the days after the event. We have the Q&A function or the Zoom chat for your questions. We also have the Connect Slack channel available for conversation for a session today and for tomorrow. If you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there's a link on the Virtual Connect program where you can request access. We also have collaborative community notes in a Google Doc. We welcome anyone to help contribute to note-taking as we move through the day. So today's sessions will run for 3 hours. We'll have a 10-minute break, a 1 hour from the start, so 1 hour from now. And we'll also have a short 5-minute break after the first hour and 55 minutes. We have an excellent but packed schedule today. You can ask questions in the Slack channel or in Zoom at any time. If there's time for Q&A after a presenter's session, a facilitator will read your questions to the presenter. And if there isn't time, or if we run out of time and there's still questions, presenters may answer your question in Slack or in the Zoom chat. And the Samvera community has a code of conduct and an anti-harassment policy, which I'll discuss in more detail shortly. I just want to give a huge thanks to the members of the planning committee this year. We had a very packed schedule put together, and we got the whole event put together really quickly. And it was my first time working on a Virtual Connect planning committee, and these folks are wonderful and experienced, and I want to thank them so much for their contributions to the whole community. So Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free community experience for everyone. From the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness and transparency in all that it does: code, design, and discussion. We're equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. Historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically from open source software communities in particular. The Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. The Samvera community is a vibrant, dynamic, and sometimes chaotic place. We believe one of our major strengths is our ability to work together collaboratively, supporting one another personally and professionally. We're not perfect, and we don't always get it right, but we strive to apply all of these principles, each of the values listed here, to all of our work and interactions. To the best of our ability, we work to be humble and responsive and not defensive when someone calls us out on not living up to these intentions. Our community has both an official code of conduct and an official anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our aspirations about how we want to work and interact. The anti-harassment policy provides a framework to address issues promptly and supportively when any member of the community feels subject to any form of harassment. This policy is only one aspect of our broader desire to build a diverse and welcoming community that encourages participation and contribution from all participants without bias. If you see something missing, we invite your input to the policy and into making Samvera a better place. If you haven't already, please take some time to review these documents today. We expect participants at all community events and forums to honor these standards. Building on the framework provided by the two policy documents, Samvera community members work together to create and promote a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that you feel you cannot address alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the Samvera board, or a helper. They're well positioned and prepared to assist you. Here is the list of helpers for today for this event. You might want to take a screenshot of this slide for your reference. It's also listed in the Connect Zoom channel, or I'm sorry, in the Slack Connect channel. So you can find these folks on Slack. Please DM one or more of them if you have a question, any question at all, or any concern, especially if it has to do with our code of conduct or our anti-harassment policy. And if you see them on Zoom or during a session and you want to reach out, please feel free to use the private chat feature. And we have an email list that you can always use to reach out for helper information, and the helpers receive all of those messages. And there's more information about the helpers on the Samvera Wiki. And if you want to become a helper, we welcome new volunteers. It's a great way to serve and support our community and learn some skills that will extend into the rest of your life at work, at home, and out in the rest of the world. So just message a helper if you'd like more information. So our community is growing. There are always newcomers, and those of us who've been around for a while really want to make the newcomers feel welcome, because we've all been that new person in the room. We've all had the experience of information overload. So let's make a concerted effort to reach out and lend a helping hand to those who are new in our community. And if you're new and find it difficult to insert yourself in the conversation despite your best efforts, please reach out to a helper and let them know. And it's not just our event leaders and facilitators who are responsible for making this a fun and welcoming and participatory event. Each one of us helps set the tone for how we work and have fun together. If you experience someone dominating the conversation or being dismissive or disrespectful of others, politely let them know or seek a helper for assistance in addressing the situation. All perspectives are invited, and in fact, they're needed. Everyone's expertise is valued, and everyone here is a contributor. So here's a reminder that microaggressions are prevalent despite all of our best intentions to be aware of our behavior. Microaggressions and subtle isms are little things that we say or do, often without awareness or intention, that make others feel uncomfortable, misrepresented, underrepresented, or even powerless. Subtle isms include but are not limited to sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, and LGBTQ discrimination and phobias. When in group discussion settings, it's important to repeat contributions, particularly from diverse contributors, and to credit commenters so that their words and contributions are not misappropriated. We all make mistakes. If you catch yourself doing something along these lines, it's no big deal. Just apologize and move on. And if you're new to the community, there's probably a lot going on that might seem unfamiliar or unclear, and it's okay to feel a little lost or out of place. And many of us have found the best way to get over our initial discomfort is to jump in, ask questions, and volunteer to help. We're an agile community working to make things better as we go, and that means everyone is qualified to help. There are no imposters here. And most of all, we want everyone to have fun, learn new things, and move Samvera forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Michael Klein from Northwestern University. And I'm going to stop sharing, Michael, so that you can jump in.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Michael Klein. My pronouns are he and him, and I am the tech lead on the repository development and administration team within the repository and digital curation work group at Northwestern University Libraries. I'm going to be talking today about building Meadow, our preservation first repository. And I'm going to start with some background, talk a little bit about our design philosophy and how we developed it, and then try to hopefully have some time left to show the system a little bit. By the time we started this project in the spring of 2019, we were looking for a number of things. We as a team were looking for an exercise in agile development, starting from the ground up with a new application. We were looking for a radical departure in terms of workflow, technical approach, and system capabilities from what we'd been doing before. We had been working specifically in terms of what Meadow is we were working with a Hyrax-based image and other asset management program that we called Donut in-house. And we were looking for something that would kind of flip that project over a little bit and give us some other options. In doing so, we also wanted to get back and think about the work group's mission and our team's role in supporting that mission. The mission as written is that the work group creates, acquires, describes, and archives digital objects for long-term preservation, and develops as well as deploys software to support the discovery, access, and use of digital resources by members of Northwestern University, scholarly communities, and the public. The public outreach part of it is very important to us, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see how we baked some of that into working, how Meadow works and how it's designed. We often get the question, what is preservation first? What do we mean when we say a preservation first repository? When we started this project, we didn't just set out to improve our existing system. We took a hard look at our workflow and asked whether the existing repository solution was working the way we wanted it to work. I like to think of this, David Schober, our team lead, talks about preservation first a lot, and that is the terminology we use. But I think a lot in terms of workflow first, putting the way the users of this software already work to use in the design and implementation of the software. That said, the analysis that we did led us to realize that a lot of our most important digitized assets were sitting unmanaged for months, or in some cases years, in local storage, because our workflow, which was determined in part by our existing repository technology, required us to front load much of the descriptive work. Basically, everything had to be done and fully described before it went into the system. So in the spring of 2019, we set out to solve that problem. And what we came up with was a workflow and a system that front loads the preservation of assets and seeks to make the describing of assets as frictionless as possible. The workflow after digitization is broken into 3 logical steps. Ingest and preserve, which is to get assets out of what we call the danger zone, shown here in red on our timeline, and into managed preservation. It also makes the assets available immediately for researchers. Our goal is to fit into existing workflows as much as possible, and we also want it to be fast and as responsive as possible. We also created a preservation dashboard, which is somewhat important, even critical to our work, because once an item is in there, we know that it is safe and that we can find it on the report, and that lends a bit of security to what we're doing. During the second step, we describe works. During this step, our metadata experts describe the assets that we have in preservation and update their descriptive and administrative metadata in a series of bulk operations and individual edit operations. We have 2 different modes of bulk operations. One is a batch, where you can apply certain metadata changes to a whole bulk of selected records at once, where everything gets the same update. And the CSV option, where you can export a number of records and all of their metadata fields to a CSV, modify that CSV file, load it back in, and all of those records are updated in place. This is the sweet spot for this new product. It allows us to do massive editing at scale without a whole lot, and it uses tools like spreadsheets and Excel that our production team and metadata team already work with a lot. And the last step is to publish and share. Immediately upon ingest, assets are findable with minimal metadata. And we also allow for the ability to share unpublished works and access controlled works via an expiring URL, so they can be sent to researchers or other interested parties that might not have the access they will need to find or view the item in the final system, but they can be given time-limited access to them in our public system. We had a number of architectural priorities when it came to designing Meadow. We wanted the system to be scalable, and we wanted an ingest pipeline and batch operations that could scale out as needed to handle large bursts of work. So the system will sit doing very little for a while, and then all of a sudden it'll have 10,000 records to ingest, or 20,000 records to update. And we wanted it to be able to scale and respond to those without intervention. Karen Shaw is going to be talking a little bit more about one of our discoveries and explorations of that tomorrow afternoon at her talk. We wanted the system to be efficient. That is, it makes the best use of its provisioned resources. Nothing sits idle unnecessarily, so that we are not over provisioning just so that we have room to scale. It's responsive in both directions. Repeatability, in that results are predictable and processes are idempotent, so that we could run the same file through twice and not end up with extraneous artifacts or junk in the system. Visibility, everything has a dashboard. If anyone makes changes to the system, they should be able to get back and see what those changes were and what works were affected. Usability, we have a completely independent front end, loosely coupled to our back end via GraphQL and Elasticsearch, developed using a user-first development process, which Adam Arling and Frank Swice will be talking about later today, I believe. And scriptability. We have our Elixir API, the way we wrote the code in Elixir, made it possible for us to write our migration code in a matter of days. This was not an easy undertaking, but it made it pretty quick, just because we had everything in the right place and everything was ready to go by the time it was time to move our objects over from Donut. The GraphQL API lets us explore and call complex operations from a special web browser scripting interface, or from the command line if it comes to that. And exposing a subset, a lockdown subset of the Elasticsearch API, allows us to plug in automatic data harvesting and discovery tools and build a public search and discovery API almost for free. We didn't have to design the syntax or the protocol. Elasticsearch did that for us. We just had to wrap it. The scalability, flexibility, and stability needs led us to Elixir, a 10-year-old programming language based on the 30-year-old programming language Erlang, which was designed for telecom systems. So it was built from the beginning as a rock-solid foundation for scalable, concurrent, high availability systems. And that's what we were looking for. In the end, our migration brought almost 147,000 works and 210,000 files over from the Donut-based system in just a couple of days. And during migration, we experienced only 111 errors, most of which were in the formatting of EDTF dates, because our new parser is stricter than the old one. So we had to take care of some of those and re-ingest them, and they sailed through pretty well the second time. Almost all of those errors were easily rectified. We did have a few other goals. We wanted to innovate. We wanted to be in a process of constant improvement, so that we felt like we were always moving forward. And we wanted to be able to share our results, even though we were stepping away from Hyrax and some of the other shared Samvera code base. We wanted stuff that we could publish in terms of code, like our serverless IIIF server that's been around for a while, in terms of concepts like our ingest pipeline, and whatever cautionary tales we run into. And we've also learned a few things along the way. One thing that is really great to learn, and nobody should be shy about saying, is that it turns out we're pretty good at this. Not just the parts we knew we were good at, but some other stuff that has come up along the way and proved challenging that we've been able to kind of catch and analyze and handle and roll with. We learned that testing at scale using realistic data is both really important and really hard. Even after 30 years of software development, 15 of them in libraries, I still struggle with obtaining realistic test data. It's not enough to shove 100 copies of tiff1.tiff and test.jpg at your system. You need those 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 item batches with the gigabyte tiffs and all the metadata fields filled out much earlier in the process than we had. And again, Karen's talk tomorrow is going to address some of that. And third, get things out to your users and don't let workarounds become the work. People who work in libraries and academia are often so used to making allowances for and devising elaborate workarounds to compensate for shortcomings in their software systems they use, that it doesn't even occur to them to tell you about their, like, the 9-step process they're going through to get the thing to work right, until you catch them doing it and ask them, you know, what they need to do their work better. So you need to be vigilant about that. In the next few minutes, I am going to start with a tour, if my screen share cooperates with me. Sorry, I just need to move a couple Zoom things around here. All right, this is what an ingest spreadsheet looks like. It is just the bare minimum number of fields that we require to get things into the system. This is a about 640 something files. And I am all logged into Meadow. I'm going to load this into our staging system. Actually, I'm going to start with the home page before I jump to that. I'm sorry, I wasn't reading my notes and I should have. Our home page gives us a very quick view of repository growth over time. So you can see here during our ingest from March 7th to March 14th, we went from 0 to 145,000 works pretty quickly, and it's been steadily growing since then. And we have down here our analytics dashboard coming straight out of Google Analytics. And I think it's great to have this right in front of users. Even though this is a staff-facing tool, this really demonstrates what we're doing this for. We did have one user of Meadow say that having this here really gives them a picture of the impact of his work and the importance of his work. So that is, I think, reason enough to have it right there. I'm going to switch over to our staging system now, which we identify by having a contrasting background so that we don't make any mistakes in which system we're working with. I have a Samvera Connect demo project here ready to load something into. And then if I go grab my spreadsheet right here and drag its icon, oh, sorry, that was not the time to do that. I need to click Add Ingest Sheet. Drag this right to it and upload. It's going to go through a validation step where it makes sure that everything is filled in and that the files are where they're supposed to be. And now it is ingesting 641 file sets. What it's doing here during this process is it is creating works. It is creating the file set objects that connect to those works and putting them in the right order, storing everything in our Postgres database, generating checksums for digests for every file, 2 digests per file in using different algorithms, moving things from where they are in the ingest area into preservation storage, gathering technical metadata for each object, and determining the MIME type for each object, and generating a pyramid TIFF file, a multi-resolution TIFF file, so that our IIIF server can serve up a zoomable, scannable, panable image. And the way it is doing this is through a message queue, a notification system, and message handlers that provide that scalability that we need. It sends messages to a whole bunch of different workers in Amazon Web Services that spin up as they're needed. Some of them are written as Lambda functions, so that it has multiple workers doing all of this work at once. And by sending messages around, we make sure that the work gets done. If something fails, the message goes back into its queue, and then it'll repeat later. And the idempotent nature of the way we wrote this means that the second time through, it's not going to duplicate work. It's not gonna it's just gonna produce the right result, whether it's the first time or the 10th time it's seeing that particular message. Once this gets to its end, and I realize I'm getting pretty close to my end, so I'm not going to have a chance to show batch edit or the CSV export or the shareable link, but I will show the next little bit of our interface. Once it reaches the end here. Well, normally it would switch over to ingest complete, and it would show me all of the objects that were created. But instead, I will come over here and select the collection John Cage correspondence. Sorry. It's all faceted under the ingest sheet that I ingested it under, but rather than flail around and look for exactly where it is, I'm gonna end here and take some questions. Anyone else who is interested in more of this, seeing more of this, or talking more about it, is certainly welcome to contact any of us, especially me or David, or look at our code, contact us through GitHub, anything you would like to do.
Thanks so much, Michael. It looks like we have time for a question or two. And the first question in our Q&A is, was Meadow written from scratch or customized from an existing system?
Meadow was written from scratch. We did take a lot of our data model and the metadata, especially the metadata model from our previous system, because we'd already gone 10 rounds on that in designing it in Donut. But as far as the software itself, it was written from the ground up, obviously using existing web framework and some other modules, reusable modules that we found. But yes, it was a greenfield project, which is how it got its name.
And one more question real quick. Did you build it all in-house or use any external suppliers?
We built it all in-house. We have a team of 4 really talented developers, if I don't mind saying. And as we had 5 up until a few weeks ago. And David leading the team and Veronica as service owner, we have been able to do this all in-house, thankfully, because Northwestern really supports this kind of innovation and forward movement in the space. So we've been lucky to be able to have the resources to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. So next
Thank
up
you very
we
much.
have, next up we have Maxence Gévaudan. So Maxence, if you want to go ahead.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can you confirm that you see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Wonderful. Thank you. So hello, everyone. I am Maxence Gévaudan from the IIIF, and I'm going to talk to you about how we linked our Hyrax repository with a people and organization referential. So first things first, who are we? The IIIF stands for School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences. So it's a university located in Paris and welcoming 3,000 master's or PhD students and about more than 700 researchers. Its research covers the fields of economics, cognitive sciences, humanities, political sciences, sociology, anthropology, and so on. Okay, and Didomena is the name we gave to our Hyrax repository. In ancient Greek, it means things being given, and it can be used by anyone whose work is related to our university. IDREF stands for Identifier and Referential. It is a French website and an API listing millions of people, institutions, fictional or historical names, authors, researchers, etc. The French higher education librarians, known as the abbés, are constantly adding entries to these massive ever-growing referential. Okay. So you all know geonames. Rather than having to store place names as strings in Hyrax, it allows us to store them as URIs, which represent geonames objects. Well, we decided to do something similar for people and institutions mentioned in Didomena. So we had to enrich the data model so that Fedora stores friend of a friend persons and friend of a friend organizations instead of strings. So now in Didomena, DC properties such as creator, contributor, publisher are friend of a friend agents. We've had to enhance the Dublin core with RGA properties to do so. So this is, as you can see, the model. What we made is an internal referential that is linked to an external referential at every possible occasion. When we create researcher accounts, we create agents and organizations in Fedora at the same time. We create users and roles in the database to manage access rights, but also friend-over-friend agents in Fedora. In order to do so, we use a RabbitMQ parallel process. When the repository users need to create or to refer to people or organization, they have access to a form. This form is based on Hydra Editor, just like the work creation form, but it uses IDREF as a source of suggestions and metadata. Users can either create an original agent or accept an IDREF suggestion. Either way, the entity will be created in Fedora, but in no case will they be able to modify a suggestion provided by IDREF. So let me show you in live what this means. This is the homepage of our Hyrax application, Didomena. This is the homepage, and I am here on the creating dataset form. Obviously, it's in French, but you can see the field title, alternative title, and other fields. So it's pretty it's not so it's pretty familiar to you. This is the creator field here, and let me show you what I said means actually. So for example, if I try to type my own name in this, so my name is Givaudan, I can find myself because I work in this university at the EHESS. So Didomena finds me in its internal referential, and I can just select myself. But if I try to find Tchaikovsky, for example, the musician, we have no matches because Tchaikovsky obviously never worked in our university, and because no work, no data set in Didomena is referred to Tchaikovsky. So Tchaikovsky was never created in Didomena. So if I try to add someone by clicking here, if here I type my name again, for example, I do appear here, but as you can see, it's on the internal reference. And if I select myself, what I get is that this reference already exists. So there's no need to create it. You are doing a mistake at the moment. This is what the application is telling me. If you want to say Maxence Givaudan, for example, you just have to select him from the field before. So this is a way to avoid people creating double or triple times the same person. But now, if I want Tchaikovsky, the musician, I can have many results, no results from the EHESS, but I have many results, and they are all coming from IIIF, which is the big referential created by the French librarians. And the one that I want, and you can see that it's very interesting here to be sure who you're talking about, because we have many Tchaikovsky. And the one that I want is Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. And if I click here, I get the IIIF page of Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, and I can see, for example, the RDF informations and many other things. And you can see all the names in Russian, in French, in German, etc. So yes, this is the one that I want. I want Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. And now when I select him, the Didomena gets all the information from IIIF, for example, the French name, the Russian name, etc. But you can't modify it. You just have to say, yes, that's the one that I want. And if I click here and save, then I would create Tchaikovsky in Didomena. So this is an example to avoid in our repository people creating twice or three times the same person, and to be more accurate when creating people. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Maxence. Thanks for the live demo too. It's great.
I can't find my the Zoom window where I was.
Let's see. I think Dananji should be able to just start sharing over.
Okay.
Give it a shot.
Okay. Heather, it says that I cannot start sharing while there's another one.
Okay, I figured out how to. Okay. There we go.
Thank you.
All yours. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me start sharing my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Dhananjay Vitana, a front-end developer with the Avalon team at Indiana University. I'm going to talk about IIIF Media Player, focusing on how it's changed from a single component to a component library. So these are going to be the topics that I will be covering during this time. So first of all, what is IIIF React Media Player? It is a component library which exports multiple components. Right now, there are only two components, a media player and a structured navigation component. The idea behind the component library is to make use of this component easier and more customizable, which we will go into details in another slide. And all these components are fed data from a IIIF 3.0 presentation manifest, which can be either fetched from a given URL or a JSON file. So if you were present in last year's Virtual Connect, I talked about this same topic. So let me tell you what's changed from last year. The first thing that changed was what the package exports at the end of the day. There are lots of applications out there that require just a simple AV player which can consume a IIIF manifest. So when we restructured the project, we wanted to make it more flexible in terms of usage. And we created a component library instead of a single component. So now when someone uses this component library, they can import only the components they need in the application instead of bringing in a single component with features they don't want. This approach makes this easier to use and more customizable in a host application. In other words, someone can use these components along with other components that they have written or imported from another package in different layouts. And the next thing that changed was the state management in these components. We've been using React Redux for this, which require a third-party library called React Redux, which worked really well actually. But then when we were restructuring the code, one goal we had in mind was to make this as lightweight as possible. And one simple step towards achieving this was to use third-party libraries as less as possible. So, and then React.js contexts were introduced, and it is React.js's inbuilt way of sharing data among components, even when they're not directly connected. And with its ability to trigger re-render on updates, it was very feasible to replace Redux's functionality with contexts. Once these consuming components are wrapped under a context provider or multiple providers, the consumers can access and update the data, which is state, in the context, which acts as the store. And subscribing consumers will re-render when the state changes. Doing it this way, it reduces the code considerably, as well as makes it easy to understand and maintain. And the next thing to change was the underlying player itself. In Avalon, we've been using MediaElement.js player for some time, and we've faced some complexities with upgrading and using its plugins. And when we started building this component library, we wanted to see whether there are other players out there. And we decided to switch to Video.js. One of the advantages we gained by switching was the ability to use the vast number of Video.js plugins out there. Unlike MediaElement.js plugins, Video.js plugins can be integrated using package managers like npm or yarn. This helped us declutter the code and reduce technical debt we were experiencing with MediaElement.js. And the last thing to change was the GitHub demo. The previous GitHub Pages demo was set up using a demo directory as a convenience directory, mocking a consuming application of the component, which was wired to live reload to help with development. But when we restructured, the starter project we used, created by Adam Arling from Northwestern University, had style guide docs integrated to it. And it provides a dev environment with hot reload Webpack dev server and a live-in style guide that can be used for proper documentation. And also this makes the development process a lot easier. Since these docs provide a great example of how these components can be used, the GitHub demo page was set up to use them. And now let's take a look at a simple demo of the style guides docs in GitHub pages. So when you go to the demo page of the repository, you can see the docs for the components. Right now, we have only 2 components. Each component has a simple description of what it's doing along with its props. And each component has a live editable usage examples based on Markdown files, making it a lot easier to interact with the components. So if you remove the structured navigation component here, the page re-renders the player, and you don't have the structured navigation component anymore. And here the IIIF player component requires 2 props. There are a manifest URL and a manifest, where the manifest prop takes precedence over the other. And we have provided some instruction in the code editor itself on how to interact with it. And we have the structured navigation here with the same layout presented. And what are our next steps? So when we started building this project, a IIIF 3.0 presentation API was in its intermediate stages of development. And now we need to update the parser to cater to the changes that happened since then. And the next major component that we are hoping to work on is transcripts, which will be broken down to 3 stages. The first one is the initial investigation. And then we need to build the wireframes and the component. And finally, we need to wire it all up so that the transcripts work in sync with the playback. And then we have playlist component that needs to be worked on. This is also one of the major components that we are hoping to work. And last but not least, we need to add LTI support, which is something we here at IU requires for this to be used in a learning environment. And all these changes that we have seen in this presentation were achieved during a 2-week community sprint we hosted during Dev Congress in 2020 Samvera Connect. And we were able to come up with a 1.0 beta release for the component library in NPM at the end of these 2 weeks, which was really great. And considering this is now in 1.0 beta, there's a lot more that needs to be done to bring this up to a standard player. And I'd like to take this chance to make an open invitation towards the community to help up with their valuable contributions. They can be either writing new code, testing this out, or just giving feedback. I have put information on this slide that links to the GitHub repo and the GitHub project. We have a bunch of tickets ready to go. And also you can reach us via a Slack channel. And that's it, everyone. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much. We have time for a question, if anybody has one. Thank you. That was great, and I hope that at a future Connect you'll be giving us an update on how far the community's helped take that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Veronica Robinson.
Hello. I'm gonna share my screen here. And actually put it in. There we go. All right, so hi, I'm Veronica. I'm the Digital Projects Assistant at Northwestern University Libraries Department of Repository and Digital Curation. And I am new here. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I thought it would be fun since I'm kind of new to the world of academic libraries and also to open source repository development. I thought it'd be fun to do a quick share out on my experience, sort of becoming a new repository service manager and share a few things that are sort of helping me find my bearings and getting comfortable with the role that I play. So how did I get here? I'm come from actually from a background of like a user, a consumer of these kinds of repository systems. Most of my work history is in museum collections management. I've worked as a curator, as a registrar, and sort of a general collections person in both historical and art museum settings. And I'm from a formal background in historic preservation, all of which are kind of traditionally rooted in the built world, and physical objects is kind of the main event. In my experience, the museum world is still often very focused on in-person experience of visiting the museum, and especially in small museums, we rarely had in-house teams for software development or IT support. We often relied on vendors for our collections management systems, digital preservation systems, and digital exhibition tools and the like. So because I was often in my role sort of a main user of these items, I very often sort of played a service manager-y type role on a really informal basis. And I didn't really realize that that was it could be a formalized role somewhere. So that was kind of interesting to experience. But in all of these sort of previous experiences, these sorts of duties were often my favorites, sort of doing things like troubleshooting and helping other users, internal users, and doing vendor relations and things. So that was always really fun, but it was never really the immediate fire that needed tending. So it was often kind of a side thing. So in February of 2020, I joined Northwestern University Libraries in sort of a hope to learn more and get more involved in the management of digital collections information, digital assets, and preservation of and access to those digital materials. I had only started working and learning about our workflow processes for our digitization work when we went to remote due to the pandemic, of course. So I began working on sort of more backlog projects in the digital collections in our repository, because I couldn't do that sort of physical inventory work and project management that I had been originally sort of brought in to be a main part of my duties. And also during that time, one of our team left for another opportunity. And this was right around when we were getting close to launching our new repository application, Meadow, which you've already heard about. And they needed someone to take on the role of service manager for the application. So I jumped at the chance when that was sort of provided. A little bit about our team here. Michael already went over this a bit, but I'll just go over the slide. As part of the repository and digital curation work group, we're a small team of developers and content specialists. We work in 6 to 8 release cycles, usually using Agile, Scrum project management methods. This was also my first formal experience with Agile, so that's kind of another place where I had a bit of a learning curve, which is fun. And we just launched our new internal repository application, Meadow. That's where we are. So I realized that service lead or service management is really different at different institutions depending on your situation and your needs. So I thought I'd go over a quick little overview of what I do as service manager and then get into lessons learned. So I started attending daily stand-up meetings as part of the repository development team. And I often provide sort of a user perspective in these kinds of discussions. As things moved forward with Meadow, I began assisting in sort of load testing the system and manually testing user-facing features on a regular basis. I act as user support and troubleshooting help and sort of a triage for issues. I talk to users, attempt to recreate problems, and either help coach the user or sometimes I escalate the issue to the developers if that's needed. I also receive and filter feedback and enhancement requests up to the team. With our product owner, David, I write and maintain in-depth user documentation, which we edit in Markdown and we publish to through a static site generator, MKDocs. I plan and execute user trainings, both for our work group who does the ingesting and description of this material, but also our internal library staff who access materials using the system. I also have opportunities to participate in usability studies, which again, Adam and Frank will be talking about later this afternoon. So I highly recommend going to see that. So some of the experiences that I found most helpful about sort of learning all of this. One of the biggest things I thought was really helpful in really helping me learn, but also getting me comfortable with the team and with my role was being a daily part of the internal repository development team rather than sort of a sometimes member or a tangential member who comes in at certain times. Being involved in those daily discussions of the work really helped me better understand the overall workflow of the development process, and allowed me to sort of better communicate with other staff about progress, when features or issues were being worked on, that sort of thing, without needing to go sort of pester someone via chat or via Slack. It inserted me into discussions that I wouldn't necessarily have been privy to otherwise. For instance, discussing how to problem solve an issue that helps me better understand logic behind different parts of the application. And that helps me better understand how to interpret explanations for other users. So it's kind of like language development. Being immersed in it made me better able to sort of use more precise language to describe what I or other users were seeing or what we needed. And it also helped me sort of hear that from the development team and explain that to users in a way that, in my opinion, might be easier for them to understand or work with. It was really a fun challenge, but there were definitely times when I had to sit in meetings where I understood like 20% of what was being discussed and just sort of try to keep up and observe. But at some point, things really start to coalesce and I do understand a lot of what's being discussed. I do a lot of things like writing down terms to look up after the meeting or asking questions. I do a lot of asking questions of people. Thank you, team. Another thing that I thought was really helpful was participating in quality assurance testing as a regular part of my duties. So going into the system, either on the staging or the production server, and testing things out helps me get to know it in a really deep way. I don't necessarily use every single function in the system in my daily work. So having to do each step in testing really made me explore the system. I got to go in and sort of intentionally break things and then get a lot of error messages and see how those things can be put back together. So this was really good in sort of familiarizing myself with common errors, troubleshooting and diagnosing what was happening, whether that was me actually diagnosing or just observing the developers work on this. Sort of with user-facing things, some stuff that I found really helpful was planning and running trainings and demonstrations. Giving trainings to our sort of varied user base was really helpful. I've done trainings with digitization staff, metadata staff, marketing communications, and some curatorial staff. And I've had to really understand what each of them needed from the system to run a training effectively. And actually running the training itself has been a good experience, bringing up questions and new information and generating really good discussion on what each user group needs. So it was a good opportunity for sort of two-way communication. I had to think from their perspective to plan it, but they also taught me a lot about their workflow that I maybe wasn't familiar with before through sort of informal discussion during the training. Our team lead actually had suggested we keep these trainings really small, and I think that was a really excellent idea because it made sure that people who were at the training really felt comfortable asking questions, talking about how they would, or in some cases wouldn't be using certain features. And that helps us figure out how to better tool the application for them to make sure that it's something they want to use and it's something that is really easy for them to use. Similarly, writing things like user documentation really helped me think through each step in the process. I had to make sure I was accurately describing each screen, taking screenshots, causing errors, and I had to actually step through each piece. And it really forces you to think a little differently about the way you step through these processes when you have to describe them in a narrative format for people, not necessarily assuming that they are looking at the application. So that was a really good way to get me to think about Meadow in a slightly different way. So I also use these applications in my daily work, so that's helpful too because I'm in them all the time. So I guess to wrap up, I always assumed that you needed a background in software development to be able to fill these kinds of roles, but more and more I'm learning from my team and I'm learning from other people in the community that having lots of different skill sets and roles and backgrounds are really, really useful in these kinds of settings. I found it really helpful for me to have come from this world of being a consumer of these applications because it helps me really get excited about the product and what it can do. And because I've worked with a lot of bad systems maybe in the past. And it helps me discuss things with users at really varying levels of technical expertise. Sometimes when you're really in the weeds of the technical details of a system, and you have really varied groups of users, it's nice to have a whole bunch of different voices to be able to interpret for users and then back to the team as well. So kind of having a lot of different voices is really helpful. As a parting thought, I really do want to give a huge thank you to the RDC repository team for all of their awesomeness. They have been so welcoming, and they've had such a willingness to explain things to me, to point me to resources, give me space to mess around and let me try things, and always been available for questions. And I think a big takeaway is having a really welcoming and supportive team is so key to getting people up to speed and really making them feel comfortable and able to ask questions and engage. So thank you very much. And thank all of you for listening to my speech. So I think I have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for sharing that experience. Absolutely agree that there's roles for all different kinds of backgrounds. We were actually at our break time. Looks like there might be a question in the Zoom chat if you want to jump in there. But for now, we are going to have a short break, a 10-minute break. So we're going to break until 10 minutes after the hour. And then our next facilitator will be April.
Welcome back from break. Next up, we have Jonathan Rockkind. Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks.
I'll stop sharing my screen so you can jump in.
Exactly. Thank you. There we go. So I'm going to talk about features for oral histories in a digital collections app. My name's Jonathan Rockkind. My pronouns are he or they. And we'll start with some context about the Science History Institute. We're a small, independent, nonprofit academic institution with a museum, library, archives, research fellowships, and public educational programs. Some in Samvera may know us by our previous name, the Chemical Heritage Foundation, but we've been Science History Institute for a few years now. We only have about 60 staff, and we do a lot of stuff, so we have to do things pretty efficiently. One of our programs, the Institute has been conducting, collecting, and curating oral history interviews with scientists, engineers, and others since the inception of the Institute. And our collection in the Center for Oral History now comprises over 1,000 interviews, including some accessioned external ones. So these have traditionally been published as bound print volumes over the past few decades. And it's a unique connection that we really prize and want it to be discoverable and usable. So when we begin our story today, in addition to the bound print volumes for oral histories, we had a Drupal-based site that provided access to oral histories also. We often call this the microsite internally to distinguish it from our main institutional website, which is also Drupal. The microsite lists and provides search over our oral histories and lets people order PDF transcripts via a form. And that microsite was developed and maintained by outside contractors to the Institute. Separately, about 5 years ago, the Institute started a digitization program leading to our digital collections application. And our digital collections application also housed an extra copy of a growing number of those oral histories. The digital collections app was originally a Sophia app, but currently is a Rails app that does not use Hyrax or Valkyrie. The digital collections app is developed and maintained in-house by a two-person team, me and Eddie Rubase. So we had started adding oral histories to our digital collections to consolidate our online holdings for discovery and preservation purposes, and it made sense to stakeholders across the institution to look to eventually phasing out the separate oral histories microsite because there would be, operational efficiencies to our small organization of not having to maintain that separate Drupal site, and it would simplify our information architecture for users. But in addition to the data migration work required, the digital collection site lacked some features that the oral history specific site already had. So first, we're going to talk about OHMs. The first thing we ended up focusing on was actually a new feature that our existing oral histories microsite didn't have. So OHMs, the oral history metadata synchronizer, is a project from Doug Boyd at the University of Kentucky. And it's about offering oral history transcripts with synchronized timecode links. So you have a searchable textual transcript, and you can easily go from that to relevant portions of an audio recording. OHMs is completely free to use. They offer a centrally hosted metadata editor, which exports XML files that have metadata and marked up timecode synchronized transcript and such. And then OHMs also provides an open source PHP viewer app that institutions are responsible for hosting or finding hosting for themselves that uses those XML files that were exported from the cloud-hosted metadata editor. So I actually found that, just thinking about them doing that, it's actually very clever if they split the software like that, because the OHMs project can then provide that centrally hosted metadata editor for free for everyone without taking responsibility for traffic scaling or uptime on the end user facing component. So I thought that was kind of neat. And it also makes possible, getting ahead of myself. So here, often institutions will host that, this is not us, this is somebody else. This is a oral history project at Westchester University. And you can see what institutions often do is they have an iframe here that has the OHMs PHP app. So this here is an iframe with the OHMs PHP app. And you can see that it gives you there's a little tab here, there's a transcript. When you click on these time codes, it'll jump to that time code in the audio. There's an audio player up here. There's also a sort of table of contents, OMS calls an index, that will jump to that section of the audio. And there's a search function, because that's a lot of the benefit of having a textual transcript. Oh, actually, it looks cooler on the transcript. There we go. So we can find in the transcript, and then we can say, oh, we want to play that part of the audio, which I'm not going to do over the presentation. This is sort of the standard OMS viewer that a lot of institutions put it in an iframe. That's not the only way you can do it. And we can see here in this one, they also have a tab. This tab shows the OMS iframe, and this tab has sort of the host environment metadata. So that's one way to do it. Oh. But a few people had made a custom OMS viewer front end, because that separation with the XML file in the middle kind of makes that possible. So we found a few institutions having done that already that showed us it was a possible thing to do. It wasn't immediately obvious we wanted to take on the burden of maintaining our own front end, but we ultimately decided it made sense for us because it just let us integrate it into our existing digital collections app a lot better than just an iframe. Our whole digital collections app, we've really prioritized design and user experience to make it look just really slick and professional, which is part of sort of, we're a pretty small institution, but we want to expand awareness and respect for institution by just making our stuff look really, a lot of our users are the public at large. So we want to attract people and make it look really slick. And we are a Rails shop. And certainly we could have hosted a small PHP app, but we prefer not to. We don't have a large in-house IT team to give us hosting options and stuff. We sort of have to do everything ourselves for our two-person team. So those things together made us say, you know what, let's give it a try and host and develop our own front end, which we did. And I think it worked out pretty well. So here's our front end. And you can see that like the OMS app, there's a table of contents tab. Oh, well, actually, let's start. There's an audio player up here, and we opted to do it as sort of a fixed nav bar. When you keep scrolling here, and that sticks to the top of the screen. And then there's a table of contents tab that, you can jump to that section. There's a transcript tab. These are very much like OMS, just re-implemented and integrated with our own fonts and colors and stuff. You can jump to that part of the transcript. But then we could also add some more tabs that were kind of more custom fit to our content. For instance, a downloads tab where you can download the PDF, the original archival audio files, an audio derivative, with sort of everything in our digital collections. We try to, wherever we have the legal rights to, we want to give users our full resolution originals. It's just one thing we try to do in our project. So we do that here. And a description tab that has our sort of general digital collections metadata, very similar to anything else in our digital collections. Now, most of our oral histories don't actually have the synchronized OMS transcript yet, because it takes a lot of labor to do that. So then we could also do a very similar look and feel. This is an oral history that doesn't have the synchronized OMS transcripts. There's no transcript and table of contents tab. We still have the description and downloads tab and a look and feel that's very similar. So very happy with how these displays worked out. We then did move on to a new feature we needed from the existing oral histories microsite, but that we didn't have in our digital collections yet, which is enhanced access control features, because a little bit less than half of oral histories, we have permissions to just give users the audio files and the transcript. But a little bit more than half, because of agreements with donors, we can't put them on the open web. We have to make users request them. So we added those features to do that. You can see in this one, there's some description of what you're going to get once you request it, some description of the request process, and a request form where a user can fill out their request. And in some cases, immediately after filling out this form, the user just gets an email with links, time-limited links to the resources they wanted. There doesn't even need to be any staff mediation. It just depends on the sort of agreements we have with the interviewees and donors. With other oral histories, the user needs to fill out the form and staff needs to kind of approve it or reject it, and maybe communicate with the requester, with the patron a bit more. So we also built out a some workflow in the back end where, there's a list of requests and there's a form where they can approve or reject it, and it keeps track of it, and it emails the patron, and if they're approving it, it emails the patron all the links and such like that. Moving on, some additional features we added. In the microsite, there was all sorts of biographical metadata about the interviewee. So we added fields for digital collections that are just used for oral histories to hold all of this biographical metadata, which then is sort of displayed in a custom way. There's education history and professional experience, which are grouped by institution, and sort of custom display, and all of this stuff is searchable in our digital collection search that's powered by Solar and Blacklight. We also have full text searching of the transcripts. For the things that are OHM synchronized, that comes from sort of the OHM's XML marked up transcript. We just index it in Solar. For things that we haven't gotten to OHM synchronizing yet, we have staff add some internal ASCII source text that isn't shown to the user because it isn't really formatted well enough to be, but it's just used for indexing in the search. And as you can see, using the standard Solar sort of search highlights feature to let people search and get hits, but we never let them look at the transcript, both because of rights and agreements with interviewees and because of it's just not formatted right. It's just sort of raw text. And that was a feature that was from our Drupal microsite that we implemented in our Rails digital collections also. We also have our digital collections app in general has a search within the collection function on all collections pages. And for the oral history collection, we used a Blacklight catalog controller subclass specific to that collection. So we could configure some facets that are only relevant for the metadata in the oral history collection. And we might use that Blacklight catalog controller subclass implementation to do some additional collection-specific search functions, search fields, or splash page kind of stuff that we haven't done yet. Another feature that I thought was pretty cool that we thought of. So we hope to retire the old Drupal microsite. In fact, we plan to very soon. But there exist lots of links out in the open web to it on Wikipedia and other places because our oral histories are cool. So we want to be good information stewards and keep those links working. And we don't want to lose any of that, precious SEO, as they call it. So we used Rails routing functions so we could point the old hostname to our Rails app, our digital collections app, and we could catch all URLs coming into it for the hostname for the old digital collections app. And we have a list of old specific known item URLs that we can redirect to their new location. People can get exactly what they're looking for. If somebody just tries to go to the homepage, it will redirect them to the oral history collection page inside our digital collections app. And for other URLs we haven't specifically mapped, we deliver an HTTP status 404, but with a nice message explaining what's going on, offering a search box for them to try to find what they're looking for that the URL broke to, and an email address because that they can email if they still can't find it. Because we want to help people find what they're looking for. We really want to maximize access to this content. So I often find in implementing new features, some of the biggest challenges can be data modeling related. And here are some examples of sort of, maybe just because the data modeling is more fundamental to the app, I find it harder to change. And it can require you changing things in the database and such. But here's some examples we ran into in this project. One is that our app with roots in Sophia has a data model that is fundamentally based on Samvera PCDM. It's very similar to most other apps in this community as far as that basic data model. So there's a work, and the work has a members relationship that can contain other works or file sets. We call them assets. In this original model, all the members are just members. They're all just kind of a flat list of members. You can look at their content types, but there's no particular identification that makes one member different than another. But for oral histories, we had display templates that really needed to put certain things in certain places. For instance, a portrait image. Some of them have a portrait image of the interviewee, and that goes in a certain place on the screen. We started out writing code with logic that was like, assume any JPEG in an oral history is a portrait, because we don't plan to add any JPEGs that aren't portraits. So if you find a JPEG, just put it in the location on the page for a portrait. many of us know from experience how fragile that kind of logic can end up being, leading to lots of confusion in the future when long forgotten assumptions baked into the code end up interacting in weird ways and being violated. So eventually we realized we wanted to add a role attribute to the data model. So every member of a work, in addition to just being a member, it has a role, for instance, portrait from a list we have. We're only using this for our oral histories now, but I could see that being generally useful to PCDM for general materials in our app or other apps when you want to do nice digital collections, templates that aren't just sort of a list of files, but have sort of custom for the kind of content like this. So another example, on the other hand, sometimes we made compromises in order to conveniently migrate our legacy data from the Drupal site. In the Drupal database, for instance, those portraits had a caption field that was just English language phrases, hadn't always been used for consistent purposes, just somebody decided to add a caption. It's some kind of photo credit or source or description of what's in there. It's sort of a very content management system, CMS-y kind of field, and we wouldn't normally put that kind of presentation focused field in our digital collections metadata, but it was data we didn't want to lose, and we didn't want to be forced to do manual metadata reclamation in order to do this migration. So we just added a caption field to the equivalent of our file sets in digital collections so we could migrate the stuff over. Maybe the biggest challenge I found, though, was the way we sort of ended up adding some additional, even whole additional entities that are very much unlike PCDM in order to most conveniently get the oral histories functionality we needed. So for instance, those interviewee biographic information I talked about, all that education experience and work experience, we ended up implementing that as a actually additional biography entity, a biography table in our database. Biography entity has a many-to-many relationship with the oral history works because some of them have more than one interviewee with more than one biography. We went back and forth on various ways to implement that data, and we weren't thrilled with any of them, and eventually just went with one that was relatively straightforward to implement. We're on a deadline, want to get this finished, said good enough for now. It does mean our internal data structures have kind of grown some oral history specific appendages, and in general gotten less elegant and less like Hyrax PCDM compatible and just more sprawling, but it works. So this phase of the project is wrapping up. We're hoping to actually retire the microsite in about 4 to 6 weeks, and then our dev team will move on to other things that aren't about the oral histories. All the stakeholders are really happy with these new features and layouts, especially the nice custom OMS view. We're already seeing increased access and downloads of our oral history materials, likely because for the first time, some materials can be accessed without filling out a form first. They're on the open web, which the old microsite didn't allow, but possibly also because of the increased attention to the user experience on a new site and to search engine optimization. Just when you have a second go at it, you can be like, oh, let's make that even better. Take what worked the last time, but make it even more attention to it. So for a small organization like the Science History Institute, the investment in even our 2-person in-house development team is not trivial. It really shows up on people's budgets. And the way I've thought of it is we justify that investment by creating high quality, bespoke features and design really customized to our particular business and user needs. And I think this is a really good example of that. We didn't just want to plunk oral histories in digital collections. We wanted to really show them off and make it as slick as we could. And I'm also pleased with how our Rails-based architecture let us add most of these features without fighting with the architecture. We added them more or less as one would in any boring Rails application, which hopefully will keep the app maintainable as it gains features and gains lines of code, even as developers turn over, as they inevitably do in any organization. It's all pretty much just Rails. I want to make sure to thank the numerous people, past and present, at the Institute that are responsible for the oral history content and metadata. Cool software features don't do anything without the content, metadata, data entry, ingest. And a lot of staff at the Institute, past and present, has really done an amazing job of that, including Lee Berry, Nicole Strunk, Hillary Kativa, Nicole Joniak, and Annabelle Pinckney. When I did the run-throughs for this, I had time for questions, but it looks like we don't now. So thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. We are at time, so if you do have any questions for Jonathan, please feel free to use the Zoom chat or our Connect Slack channel. And next up, we have our interest and working group updates. And first up is our Controlled Vocabularies Decision Tree Working Group. May I have the speaker?
Hi, this is Julie Hardesty. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Julie.
Yes, hi. So I'm Julie Hardesty. I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University. My pronouns are she, her, and the Controlled Vocabularies Decision Tree Working Group was made up of the following members: Dawn Childress, Gretchen Giggin, Rebecca Patillo, Eric Radio, Lynette Rail, and myself. And we actually completed our work in March this year, and the decision tree for Controlled Vocabularies is now published, and we've got it linked up there in the slide. And the decision tree is meant to provide guidance for selecting and using controlled vocabularies behind descriptive metadata fields. We also wanted to provide information useful to the Samvera community on how to work with controlled vocabularies within Hyrax. So we did this, we ended up looking at this in different levels. So kind of looked at the first level, which is evaluating any controlled vocabularies that come with the system that you are using. So if you have a content management system of some kind in place and you've got descriptive metadata fields, considering if there are controlled vocabularies that are being supplied behind any of those fields and if they fit the needs that you have. Then the next level is going to be is looking at whether it's possible to add a controlled vocabulary behind a field or to replace a controlled vocabulary that's already there. So we provide information about that. And then the third level is looking at customizing, modifying, and creating controlled vocabularies to make use of with any of the system that you might be using. So, and with each of these levels, we're providing examples within Hyrax and Haiku to try and show what's possible with the systems within the Samvera community. So we're also, we provide further reading suggestions and some appendices, and those give some additional information on supplied term list locations within Hyrax Haiku, as well as information about controlled vocabularies that are available with the questioning authority gem that you can use with Hyrax. And alongside the decision tree document, we also have an accompanying controlled vocabularies and criteria list. It's incomplete, but it is offering controlled vocabulary options that are available and along with the domain that they cover. So it's kind of a place to start, and we're still contemplating how that can grow. So even though the working group is finished, that document is open for suggestions and to add to the list or provide comments about how to organize and offer that as a resource. So thank you very much to that working group, and thank you all.
Thank you, Julie. The next working group up is Hyrax Development Support and Engagement Working Group.
That's me. Hi, folks. Heather Greer-Klein, she, her. And the Hyrax Development Support and Engagement Working Group was created this spring when community members who work on Hyrax development and maintenance identified several chronic issues that must be addressed to protect both Hyrax community code and those who dedicate their time and energy to maintaining it. So some of the issues that were identified in those conversations in the tech call were a perception that contributing fixes upstream to Hyrax community code is difficult and time-consuming, a lack of local support for turning local fixes into community code, the large and complex code base and seeing a decline in contributors, and a history of burnout among community members who take on technical leadership roles. So this group will develop deliverables to address these issues from several angles. We're looking at ways to increase community engagement, make some recommended best practices, and bring a lot of our work to community leadership. We're also looking at training and development opportunities for the community and making those more consistent, and recommendations for better ways to care for our folks who step into technical leadership roles. So where we are right now is we've set a quarterly schedule for developer congresses. The next is going to begin on May 3rd. Really encourage anyone who's interested to sign up to participate. And we're also planning to have a Dev Congress sometime this summer that's really focused on helping new contributors to get started in the community. So stay tuned for more information about that. Our other big effort right now is we're working on a document to describe the known challenges that may limit contributions to Samvera Community code. So the working group's going to use this document to see if we can propose some solutions that are going to address these challenges. And some of those solutions might be process things or things that we can implement at a community level. But we know that there are other more systemic challenges and potential solutions that are going to need to be brought to community leadership. So things that we need to bring to the Samvera board and to Samvera partners. So there is a link there to the challenges for developer participation in Samvera code implementation list. There's a lot of excellent information already there, and a big shout out to Lynette for contributing really detailed and thoughtful descriptions of challenges. And we want to be certain that we include input from developers at all levels, including developers who've never contributed, but who may be in a position to contribute to community code. And we welcome anyone in the community to review that document and add comments. We're asking for comments by May 7th. So feel free to comment in the document with questions, ideas, add additional challenges, your perspective on those challenges, or anything else that you'd like to share with us. We also welcome new working group members. So if you're interested, just drop us a line in the Hyrax Support Engagement Working Group channel in Samvera Slack. And that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Heather. Next up, we have Samvera Metadata Interest Group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Goslin, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm metadata librarian at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Samvera Metadata Interest Group, along with Nora Egloff from Lafayette College. And today I am giving a brief update on the group. So SNIG works on metadata recommendations for the Samvera community, focusing primarily on metadata as it relates to Samvera projects such as Hyrax, Avalon, and Haiku. And we meet on the 4th Tuesday of the month from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time via Zoom. And our calls average around 10 to 15 participants. Our next meeting is a week from today on Tuesday, April 27th. Our wiki includes information about the group's current activities and meeting information such as notes and call-in instructions. It can also be found on Slack in Samvera's metadata channel. Since Connect last year, we've had continued work by 2 of SNIG's working groups, the Hyrax version 3.0 metadata application profile documentation working group, and the control vocabularies decision tree working group. The Hyrax map documentation review working group has essentially concluded its work. There is a link to the map and M3 specification that can be found on the group's wiki page, and updates to the knowledge base pages will be published in the coming weeks. And as you heard from Julie, the control vocabularies decision tree working group completed its work last month, and their decision tree can be found on their wiki page. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Next up, we have Samvera Roadmaps Alignment Group.
Yes, my name is Jennifer Young, and I am the metadata coordinator at Northwestern University. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the current facilitator of the Roadmaps Alignment Group. We used to be known as the Roadmap Council, so we changed our name about 6 months ago, in case you have not heard that. So we are made up of primarily the sort of 4 big product owners of from Avalon, Hyrax, Haiku, and Valkyrie. We have 2 representatives from the Components Maintenance Working Group, myself representing the Metadata Interest Group, and then we have representative from the Repository Management Interest Group, and then Heather, as the community manager, also has a role in the work in the alignment group. So what we have been working on since Connect in last October is we've created a roadmaps alignment document where we have been trying to get information, particularly from partners, about feature work that they may be doing sort of outside of Samvera, to see like things that we might want to bring back into the code, but also potential for collaboration between partners or between for other people to work on. And we were also just recently asked to sort of take over the maintenance and of the Samvera implementations in production document that was previously maintained by the repository management interest group. We feel like this will dovetail nicely with the alignment document. So we're going to start doing that very soon. Just a quick note that we do rotate our facilitators, and we originally did quarterly, then we were 6 months, and I started in January, but very recently we decided that we're going to keep it as 6 months, but we want to sort of tie it to the Samvera Connect time. So I will probably be in this role until hopefully in person Samvera Connect in October, or whenever that tends to be. So some future work that we also want to do between now and then is sort of making sure we finish codifying the product owner selection and nomination process. We did a lot of work for that with the Hyrax PO recently. And then also advancing the code reclamation project, looking for things that we can reclaim back into the code for Samvera. So I've also linked, we have a Slack channel and our wiki page. We do meet every other Tuesday generally, actually at this time, 11 a.m. Central. And we actually would have met today, funnily enough. So if our meetings are open, but if you want to reach out to us, Slack or, message, our emails are on the Slack, on the wiki page as well. And always open to any questions or suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. Last up, we have the Samvera User Experience Interest Group.
All right. My name is Adam Arling. I'm a UI developer at Northwestern, and I'm co-facilitator of the User Experience Interest Group with Carla Arton, a newcomer from University of Virginia. And I guess some basic information about the interest group. So normally we meet on the second Wednesday of each month at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And our Slack channel is what it has been for the past few years, just UX interest group. Just to give a quick update. So 6 months ago at Samvera Connect, I actually proposed possibly disbanding the user experience interest group. And conveniently, about a day after that, Carla reached out to me, asking about, what the user experience interest group was up to in the next year. And she had some really strong, compelling ideas about what I thought would be a nice renewed direction for the user experience interest group. So I guess point one, it's still alive. We're not disbanding it. We just kind of rethought it for 2021. And I think it's been a good exercise and process so far. Carla and I have had some discussions and kind of raising some questions like what does such a wide variety of like Samvera code, have in common besides just serving the general digital repository needs of the library or cultural heritage community. Like, what does it mean to be a Samvera application? And, it kind of led us to what if some general criteria existed, which Samverians, whether that's a developer or a product owner, manager, designer, or whatever, could reference when designing and developing new apps or modules. So it kind of led us to a mission statement of sorts that was thinking about developing a set of design principles based out of user-centered design. And this set of design principles maybe could reflect the values and goals of the Samvera community. And in addition, they could also potentially serve as a guide for application design before maybe development begins. So for example, when creating like wireframes for a new feature, does the wireframe content meet a set of existing design principle standards? These design principles could also act as a reference point for applications in active development, and also maybe be a tool to evaluate existing Samvera applications, against these set of principles to see where they meet them or where they might fall short. So currently, the UX interest group, which has enjoyed a lot of doubling in its attendance so far this year, which has been awesome. Thank you to all you out there for joining us in 2021. So far, we've been kind of crafting a first draft of this set of design principles and trying to look at what a lot of other institutions use and some kind of active thoughts in the UX and the broader UX world and so forth. So what we've kind of arrived at so far is a set of design principles kind of revolving around four key initial, I guess, tenets. Number one, to be human-centered. Number two, a principle of being efficient. A third, being unified. And then a fourth of being sustainable and equitable and ethical, rather. So I guess it's kind of a work in progress, and we ideally we'd like to get a first draft of these design principles, and then we're in the process now of setting up meetings with some other active Samvera projects. Whether it's Haiku, I think we have one on the books for later this month, or whether it's Avalon or something like Browse Everything. We figured it might be a good opportunity for the UX interest group to just kind of, start having some conversations with various projects out there and just kind of put, the user and the user experience and user design kind of at the forefront, or at least have that conversation and not let it just get, I guess, bypassed, which is pretty easy to do when we're all pretty busy. So that, I guess, is our update. Everyone is invited to join any of our monthly meetings and be part of this process. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. I realized we've finished just a bit early, so we're just going to take a little bit of a longer break. If you can just be back here at the top of the hour, we'll start with our next speaker. We'll be back.
Hello, everyone. This is Ilkay, and we are almost at the top of the hour. We will start very, very shortly. Hannah, I think you will be the speaker, right?
Yeah, I'm going to start.
Okay, I will stop. It's just right at the hour so that you can take over.
Okay, go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, now it's all yours. Please go ahead.
Can everybody see that?
Coming up, if you present it. Yes.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started then. Hi, everybody. I'm Hannah Frost, Assistant Director for Digital Library Services at Stanford Libraries, and my pronouns are she, her. If you've been around the community for the past couple of years, I think you are aware that we've been making a concerted effort to revisit our code of conduct and some of the related policies and practices. And so some of us are here today to give you an update on that. So one of the most significant events that's happened in the past couple of years is the incident response training that about 13 of us took back in December of 2020. We did it with Sage of Otter Tech, Sage Sharp. And it was a half-day workshop, and I think all of us were really surprised about how engaging and really how thought-provoking it was. Lots of practical lessons and scenarios, working through scenarios, and we learned a lot. And I think one of the big takeaways is it really reinforced the importance of this work, and that the one thing that's worse than not having a code of conduct at all is having one in place but not knowing what to do in the event of, how to take action with that when a violation is reported. I think it's also safe to say that as a community, we've been pretty fortunate to not have many serious incidents or situations in our history. But the consequence of this track record is that we're inexperienced and frankly, we're unprepared. So our takeaways from this workshop was that we have some of the most important work is still left to do. We need a clear structure and a robust end-to-end process for responding to a reported incident. One that lays out communication, who communicates what to whom and when, documentation, what to document, where to document it, and how that documentation is managed, participation, who needs to be involved, when should they be engaged, and who need not be involved in a response. And maintenance, keeping our policies current, our skills fresh, and our documentation updated. With all of this, we'll be much better prepared to respond to a reported incident promptly and calmly, not frantically. We'll be able to navigate the situation as the investigation takes place and moves towards resolution, and ultimately support our volunteers who take on this difficult work on behalf of the Samvera community. So the two immediate concrete steps we then took are we consulted with Anna Lee Flower Horn, who is working with us on our code of conduct. And the other one is we officially chartered the Samvera Community Safety Working Group. The charter went up last month, and we've been working basically since January. And I want to thank all of the members of the working group, Chris, John, Jeremy, Jessica, Nabila, Heather, Michael, Kevin, Brian, Rosie, Alicia, Bess, and Simeon. You all are great to work with, and it's great to get this work further underway. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simeon, who's going to tell us more about what we're working on.
Hello, everyone. I'm Simeon Warner from Cornell University, and I go by he and him. So two documents that are foundational to our approach here are the Code of Conduct and the Anti-Harassment Policy. These are really important in setting the stage and helping everyone understand what the community agrees upon as our standards of behavior. I think if you think back to the beginning of today, with Heather going through the code of conduct and in fact expanding on a bunch of other related issues, that's important to set the stage and set the tone of the meeting. So this is something very important. Next slide, please.
Hang on, I'm trying. I was telling Heather earlier how I struggle sometimes to advance my slides. Hang on. There we go.
Maybe you need to make that sound, Samvera, like when we were kids, that bing, and it was turn the page. Do that. I bet that works.
Okay, I'll try Bing next time. So just a note before Jessica and I start talking about changes. We're talking about changes that will apply in the future. The current code of conduct and the current anti-harassment policy apply to all of this meeting. We're hoping to put things in place for Connect in the fall, but for now, things are as they are. So Bing. I'll try Google next time. One of the things that's been emphasized to us in this work is the need for a process of regular updates. The suggestion is that we should in fact be having an annual review of these policies and documents and procedures. And I think, we should think of them as living documents, review annually, update as necessary, and then use them all the time. So we should be publicizing these through reading them out at the start of meetings or linking to them in all online fora. So Bing. The code of conduct. So this is really the sort of expression of what we expect and what we hope for. I think if you go and read through or remember the current code of conduct, it's pretty good. Sounds pretty good to me. And I think we haven't received feedback in the review so far that leads us to believe that very major changes are necessary to our code of conduct. But I think we should continually be asking, does this describe the community we want? If it doesn't, then we should change it. In the current version, there are some comments about how we implement the code of conduct via links to the anti-harassment policy and the group of helpers, which will need to be updated as part of this process. But as I say, otherwise, I think we have a solid basis there. Next slide, please. Then there's the anti-harassment policy. So if the code of conduct is the hopes and expectations, the good, this is the document that defines unacceptable behaviors and specifies processes for dealing with this. One of the things that's been emphasized to us by Sage and by Anna Lee is that what we're trying to do is set up procedures that prevent further harm to individuals and to the community, and where possible, mitigate the impact of incidents if they happen. In this case, we have a rather significant update, in particular around the procedures for dealing with an incident. And this is what Jessica is going to talk about a little bit more. And I think this is the focus of the work. Ooh. And now over to Jessica.
So I'm just going to go over some of we're talking a lot about changes. I just want to give you a heads up on what are some of the changes that we're talking about. Obviously, we're not ready to share any changes to the policy at large, any finalized form, but I want to tell you kind of a heads up of what we're going over and what those changes are going to be. Bing! So the first thing that we did when we started looking at this with Anna Lee was, where are the lacking areas? And the two big areas were, if there was an incident, we don't have a guide that takes a responder through how to handle an incident. There's not one way to handle it. There's not kind of a description of like, do this first and then it goes to this place. So what we first started with was, it's not just training on incident response, but then it's a step-by-step guide of how to handle an incident, so that if we do have an incident, we all handle it the same way. And then the second big thing that was found lacking is there's no timeline of a response to an incident. So if an incident is reported, there's no, okay, you should hear back from us this time, then it goes to this step, and then it goes to this step. So that's alerting the response team, taking a statement when appropriate, assembling an incident team, investigating an incident, and speaking to the involved parties all falls on a timeline. With those in mind, the primary goal of responding to a code of conduct incident is to prevent future harm to the community and mitigate, to the extent possible, harm the incident has already causing. And we are keeping those goals in mind as we write those incident response guides and the timeline to response. Bing! I love this. I'm going to bing all my presentations now. This is great. So a lot of this is formalizing procedures, and that includes vetting of the code of conduct incident response team, the response procedure, which I already kind of went through, and then contact methods and record keeping. A lot of this, I won't say was done on the fly because that's not fair. A lot of it was done in the best interest of Samvera, but it wasn't necessarily formalized or put down in writing on what are the steps that are involved. And so that's a big part of these changes, is formalizing those methods. Bing! Another big change that's going to happen is Samvera helpers. There's going to be changes to helpers to rotate a group of vetted volunteers to help with code of conduct incidents. One of the things we're really worried about, and that happens a lot, is code of conduct incident responders tend to get burned out. And of course that's going to happen. It's a very high stress position to be in. So the idea that we would have a rotated group that would come in and that was vetted to handle these responses is a big part of that. Bing! And so finally, if there are questions, you can take a look at the Samvera Code of Conduct Working Group Charter. It is linked in the slides, but also if you just, if you're in our Atlassian instance and search for that, it'll pop right up. It's the first. And then you can email three of us, or you can go on Slack, hashtag safety-WG for working group, and ask us questions there. And that is the end.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Hannah and Simeon, we all loved pinging. I don't see any questions waiting or burning. So if our next speaker is ready, we can go ahead, with the next speaker on the user first development with usability tests.
All right.
Is that Adam?
Yep. Sure.
Okay.
Share this. Get my notes a bit organized here. All right, so this is Adam again, and I'm presenting today with coworker Frank Swice, who is a new user experience librarian at Northwestern. And today we're going to talk a little bit about user first development and usability tests. So for a little bit of context, over the past year, as I'm sure prior to Lotto so far today, our development team has been working on a new repository application. And through that, we've been experimenting with new processes, design thinking and so forth, and basically trying to get better at building modular applications. In the same time, over the past 2 years, and then more recently in the past year, Northwestern Libraries hired a UX librarian, and our team in repository and digital curation was lucky enough to have a chance to work with Frank. Frank brought in experience, his background in human-computer interaction and usability testing. And the first time, at least in my time working with this team, we conducted official usability tests. So we just kind of like to share a little bit of our experience with the group. So to start with, user-centered design. So user-centered design is an iterative process that focuses on an understanding of the users and their context in all stages of design and development. This comes from the Interaction Design Foundation nonprofit. So in user-centered design, you base your projects upon an explicit understanding of the users, tasks, and environments. So the aim or the goal of this is to capture and address the whole user experience. And this is something user-centered design that for us on the development team, we try to remind ourselves a lot of throughout the past 2 years. So a lot of the times, all of us work on complex, large systems, right? So it's good to keep in mind that what we see as developers is definitely not the whole picture. User-centered design for us meant, hey, let's riff on an idea, get it out to staging, or the staging environment, and run it by users and learn as quickly as possible what we might have gotten right or what we may be missing. So next, I'll let Frank talk a little bit how we somewhat formalize this process.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks all for having me. So what are usability tests specifically? So what are we trying to understand with these tests? And usability tests are quite simply, it's a small group of users who are interacting with your product as they would in real life. And what that allows for us is to work with them one-on-one and just understand if the product is allowing users to successfully complete those given tasks and help us kind of uncover any issues along the way. And we performed these usability tests a few months before Meadow launched into production. And so why did we decide to test that now? Previously, the team had worked with some users in a prototype to get some feedback from them. And they wanted to kind of formalize and validate some of those design approaches in a working system of Meadow. So actually having the users interact with Meadow and perform the tasks there. Next slide, Adam. And so what exactly is a usability test and how can you kind of get one started? So the first thing you want to do, it's not mentioned on the slide here, but you want to determine who your users are. So who are the folks who are going to be using Meadow in this scenario, and what tasks do we anticipate them using kind of in their day-to-day or when they do interact with Meadow? And so once you do have that, and you can start thinking of some tasks for them to do, you can create realistic scenarios to guide the participants through the workflow, in this case, Meadow's workflow. And as you have those scenarios and as you have those users performing those tasks, what that allows you to observe is what the users are thinking. We ask them to think aloud as they're performing the tasks, how they're interpreting the user interface that they see in front of them, how the tasks flow between one another, and whether or not the users are actually able to complete the tasks, and understand a little bit about the ease of use and satisfaction with the system. And for each session, we also made sure that the project team that was observing the usability testing got together to debrief after each session to share any high-level concerns or issues that might have been covered. And you can see on the right of the slide are 2 specific tasks that we had developed for the usability testing relating to Meadow, to give you an idea of what type of scenarios we were having our users perform. Slide. And in this case, we did 2 rounds of usability testing with our users. And the first round, what we did is we've kind of focused on who would be considered kind of our expert users or our power users. So these are folks that we anticipated would interact with Meadow regularly, perhaps daily, and also utilize some of its deeper, more complex functions. These could be folks that could be considered digitizers in the library world, and folks that are going to be have a really good understanding of that workflow and be able to comment on how Meadow is supporting them with that workflow.
And then for round 2, we kind of shifted to a different user group that focus more on general users, not necessarily power users of the system. So to prepare for this, Frank updated some of the tests and test scenario, tasks and actions to be more general things like, say, just how do you share a work, or how do you find a specific collection or items in a certain collection that a researcher might have requested. So this round was particularly interesting for us in the development team to observe because we got to see, again, the system through very different eyes. Some users, for example, didn't have much experience at all with repository systems. Other users might not have been familiar with some of the terminology and language that we kind of baked into this application unknowingly even. So at this point, it was nice to get that refreshed, I guess, look at the application, see where it was at leading up to launch not too far away. And at this point, we're also able to analyze some of the user feedback that we got from round 2 pretty quickly and triage that into actionable issues, some of which our team was able to close within a day or just a few days of conducting the usability tests. So for us, just keeping this quick, agile, iterative process, this was really key in the final stages of our app development.
And just kind of quickly at a kind of a high level approach of what we learned from those 2 rounds of usability testing. And this was with about, I want to say just about 10 or so users that met with us for about an hour for each session. We learned about our organization, our content organization. So were there items or pieces of information that we needed to surface more clearly and change a little bit of the interface for that? What was the user's expectation versus how the system was presenting itself? So does the system language work for our users, or are there opportunities to match their mental model a little bit better? What would require training or documentation? So some tests in Meadow are complex, and now we can better anticipate what support resources we should make available to help folks with some of those more complex tasks or workflows. And also low difficulty and high satisfaction rankings, which are always good to document. In this case, we had really good positive feedback, and that can help demonstrate to stakeholders how our design goals are being met with the development. One thing that's not mentioned on here too is usability testing also allowed us to do other research opportunities. In this case, doing a card sort that helped us better organize and better label some of the facets that our users would be using within Meadow. So it also presented an opportunity for additional research, which was really great for us to do.
So I guess enough about us. What does usability testing mean for those out there? Like say you want to get started on your own usability tests, which I would highly encourage. A lot of times, again, being in the development world for a while, you see this kind of get put on the back burner because of limited resources, time, and all these other constraints. But I think just to experience this in the past few months, at least for me, just reconfirmed the value that this has to delivering a product that users are going to want to use. And I think to get started for anyone out there that's interested, I mean, it doesn't have to be super formal. It can be as basic and simple as you want to make it, but you could boil it down to these 5 steps. So number 1 being plan the session. And this is arguably, the most important part. So define areas of an application you want to focus on and the types of users you want to test. Recruiting participants. So in a library environment, it's probably easiest to recruit maybe coworkers, or you could use your website or application directly through techniques like pop-up polling, for example. Designing the tasks. So here you want to carefully plan the specific scenarios you'll guide users through. And Frank did an awesome job of this for us. It just makes everything go really smoothly. And you want to keep it, the most important areas of the application in mind, and not necessarily get lost in some of the deep corners of the app, but just keep in focus, like what's the main, I guess, tasks of the application. Running the session. So I think here it's important to kind of follow the same protocol with each participant so you can get accurate, measured results. Make sure introductions are made in the beginning, make sure the user's comfortable. So again, you're getting like accurate feedback from the test. Then finally, analyze the insights. notice any macro level trends, common repeated results, and more. And if people wanted more information, Frank has compiled a few items here.
Yeah, and these are just some resources that I found helpful to introduce usability testing to perhaps folks on your team that might be unfamiliar. And the first two, Just Enough Research by Erica Hall and Rocket Surgery Made is Easy by Steve Krug, also offer a couple of best practices for conducting these type of researches at a very low cost. So, if you're looking to just do it with a handful of users or just kind of get things started, they're really great resources. And then the third one too is really good and really important when you're determining how to implement accessibility into your workflows as well.
I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Frank. I'm just checking whether there's any question for you. We are doing fine with the time, so we can take questions. Okay, I don't see any, so why don't we go ahead with Brandon, our next speaker, talking about local authorities dashboard, again from Northwestern University.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I just spoiled my my big secret reveal there for my demo. All right. So hopefully you all can see my screen. Hi everybody. I'm Brendan Quinn, a senior developer at Northwestern University Libraries. A lot of us talking today, and I'm one of the members of the team. I go by he, him, and I just hit my 10-year anniversary at Northwestern, so that was pretty cool. So today I'd like to talk about our migration from Donut to Meadow, which Michael talked about this morning in the opening session, but specifically about how we migrated our local authorities from Donut to Meadow. And I learned a new word for this, negentropy, which is the opposite of entropy. So we're trying to make order out of chaos here a little bit. So with Donut, which is our previous system, which I won't show today because it is shut down and not online anymore. So I'll just have to talk about it and show you some couple of slides. So Donut had 146,000 odd works that needed to be migrated. We sort of made a promise to the library staff that we were not going to require anything of anybody during the migration. So just QA basically, but we weren't manually editing records. So the image records in Donut had free text fields for contributors, creators, and subjects, totaling about 18,000 unique string values. So here's a couple examples. The last one being just the letter A. So you can kind of see where I'm going at in terms of how we're going to remediate things in the future. As part of the migration, our data model in Meadow requires IDs for controlled terms. So we couldn't just migrate these strings over to our new system Meadow. We had to come up with a process to get these 18,000 values into Meadow in a way that makes sense for our new system. So here's kind of a back of the napkin example of our process here. So it was kind of like 4 steps. The first thing was we created the authority records in Meadow based on a CSV export from Donut. So we used Elasticsearch and Solr to index information. So we used an Elasticsearch scroll to get the 18,000 records and mint IDs for them in Meadow. And then we took that CSV export and put it in an S3 bucket. And then as part for step 2, the second box, we exported all the works from Donut, so all 146,000 works. We exported those to individual JSON files for each work and stored them in S3 as part of the migration. And during that migration process, we mapped the string labels in Donut to the IDs in the Meadow CSV. I hope that makes sense. And from there, so at that point, we have 150,000 JSON files in S3 with the correct ID label values for each of these 18,000 terms. And then so we imported those into Meadow over about a day and a half or 2 days. We got all the works into Meadow. And we're now at the last step, which is remediate the data using our new NUL authorities dashboard, we're calling it, and the batch edit features that are part of Meadow. So I'll talk a little bit about the Meadow side of things now. These are pretty cool images from Unsplash. If you've ever used that, it's a pretty cool site. So in Meadow, we have an NUL authority module that implements an authoritext behavior. So authoritext is a hex package, which in Elixir is like a Ruby gem, that we use to define all the behaviors we need for controlled vocabulary. So we use authoritext to, we have modules for Library of Congress, FAST, Getty, etc. And so this is another one on, in addition to those, that's specifically for NUL authorities. Each authoritext behavior requires defining fetch for known ID retrieval and search functions. The search function that we use in Meadow it's a pretty basic Postgres ILIKE and wildcard search. So it's not a really fancy search, but if we need to make it better over time to like weight things, for example, we can do that later on. But for now, we're just using Postgres search functionality. And the NUL authority module only resolves records with info NUL prefixes. So it's info:NUL/UUID is the sort of handle we've chosen. And then so the dashboard lets our users create, edit, and delete records that are stored in the Postgres database. And it also links to our search interface to show works that contain references to that particular authority record. And we kind of came up with a cool way to do that using dynamic mapping in Elasticsearch. So these controlled terms can be, in a subject field, in a genre, location. They can kind of be all over the place in terms of our JSON B column in Postgres. And the queries to write that are actually really, really hard, but we sort of got around that by indexing these terms in a dynamically mapped part of the document. So all of these controlled terms end up in a field called all controlled terms, which we can search easily. So we don't have to sort of pick and choose logic based on where the terms are in the descriptive metadata, which is really nice. And then the other piece of this is that these NUL authority records are sort of treated as first-class citizens along with the other authorities. So right alongside FAST and Getty and Library of Congress authorities, you can see the Northwestern Library's local authority, and I'll show that in the demo in a second. And just a big shout out to Adam Arling, who just spoke, for building out our React form components that made this really, really easy to do. So without further ado, I'll try a live demo. Wish me luck, everybody. But one thing I wanted to show first is, so we're using Elixir as the backend for, thanks, Anna, as the backend for our system. And Elixir has a really cool feature, which is sort of concurrency built into the language. So this is a really new tool called Livebook that came out of the folks who created the language itself. They work at a company called Dashbit now. And so it's very similar to Jupyter Notebooks, if there are any Python or data science folks out there. But so it basically allows you to do Markdown and a live coding environment together in a web page. So you can kind of see here, I'll start at the bottom because I did it backwards. But you can see here, I'm retrieving a work. This is the work's UUID and the descriptive metadata. So you can kind of see the controlled entries that I have on a work. So here's a genre, which is multi-valued. This is a list of one item for cartoons. So you can see the NUL authority ID and then the label. And so that's in the genre field. There's subjects with similar things. Subjects have roles, so a subject can be topical or geographical. So we have a pretty complex system going on here, but this is all part of the JSON-B column where we store our descriptive metadata. To talk about the authortext API for a second. So it's really boils down to two functions, fetch and search. So you can see this is an example of fetching a record where you pass in the ID and you get back a tuple, which is an OK and then the value or error and the reason for the error. And so you can see that there's an optional hint argument, and this is the ID, the label, and a qualified label. And then for search, you pass in the code, which is part of the definition of in the module itself, where you say the code for this authority is NUL authority. And then you pass in the search term as the second argument. So here you can see searching the authority for the term demo here, or if I change the term to say game and run it, you can see here's all the results for that contain the word game. So that's kind of how it works on the back end. And then sort of the CRUD functionality that powers our dashboard, which I'll show in a second, shows you can list authority records with a limit. So here's an example of 5 records from the database. You can see the hint, ID, label, and timestamps. So that's what allows us to populate the dashboard. And then you can also edit labels. So if I want to change the label for this record to something else, let's see, test. So now you can see I just updated this record in my database in my dev environment to test. So that's how we update labels, and that's a part of the dashboard functionality. And you also we have a change set that doesn't allow users to change the IDs for records. So if I try to update this ID, it'll be returned basically as a no op or a non-operation with this ID intact. So that's kind of how this all works under the covers, as it were. And then I'll give a brief demo of what it looks like in our staging environment. So this is Meadow staging, as you can see here. And we have a dashboards interface. So we have a few different dashboards here, but here's our authorities dashboard. So I added an authority record for Samvera Virtual Connect, and I'll add a new one just for fun. I'll call it new Samvera record, and I won't have a hint for it. And so here's the new Samvera record, but if I click this link here, it'll bring me to the search page that shows me all the works that contain this record. So in our staging environment, I have 17 results here. So each of these records has somewhere in the descriptive metadata, Samvera Virtual Connect 2021, this record. So in this case, it's in the location field. And then in addition to that, I'll go back to the same search. And this is all wired into our batch editing and individual editing records interfaces. So if I batch edit these 17 works, I can pick, let's say I want to add a topical subject. So you can see here's fast, and we have all the different authorities here. Sorry, the text is small, but I can't bump this up. And at the bottom here, you can see Northwestern University Library's local authority. And I'll add that in, and I'll do a search for Samvera. And so you can see the new record that I just added populates here in the autocomplete. And then if I save it, at the top, it'll say I'm adding this new record, new Samvera record, local authority to these 17 records. I type I understand and confirm changes, and off they go. And that's it for my demo.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you so much.
We have one question. I think a couple of people answered already in Slack, but let me read the Q&A question for our recording. Is your database a cache of external authorities, e.g. Library of Congress or CLC, etc.? If a cache, how do you keep your cache in sync with the external authority changes?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So we do not cache searches, but we do cache fetches. We have a pretty cool caching system in place where we we have a database cache and an in-memory cache. So when we fetch a record, it populates the database cache and the memory cache, so that if you say you have an ingest spreadsheet with 10,000 records that all have the same ID in it, you won't keep refetching the ID. It'll store it in the cache, and it's basically instantaneous after that. And I think that the TTL, or time to live, for our cache is like a day or two, something like that. It's not super long, but yes, we do have caching in place, but only for fetch, not search.
Thank you, Brandon.
Sure.
Okay, let's move to our next and the last speaker of today. David Wilcox and Aaron Griffiths will talk about the Fedora 6.0.
Hi, thanks. Let me just share my screen.
Thank you.
All right, are my slides coming through okay?
Yes.
Perfect, great. So yeah, hi, I'm David Wilcox, go by he, him. I'm the program leader for Fedora at Lyrasis, and I'm joined by Aaron Griffith, who's the program coordinator, also working on Fedora at Lyrasis. Aaron will introduce herself when she takes over kind of partway through this presentation, but I'll kind of jump into things here. Just want to talk a little bit about the kind of roadmap for Fedora, what's going on with Fedora 6, and this is sort of the plan for this calendar year. So we do plan to release Fedora 6.0, which is the latest version of the software. And along with that, we plan to release really robust migration tooling and support documentation for the community to be able to kind of adopt this latest version of the software. Post 6.0, our plan really is to turn our focus to supporting the community and trying to either create a new greenfield instance of Fedora, whether that be in the context of Samvera or Islandora or a custom setup, and also helping folks to migrate. And we also want to prioritize after that really more external integrations. So not so much on the core of the software, but more kind of things that we can connect and integrate with that might be high priorities for the community. So from the Samvera perspective, I think there's a number of potential benefits to Fedora 6.0 that might make it attractive. One being sort of enhancing support for digital preservation, which we think is a feature that was more present in version 3 of Fedora and less present in 4 and 5, but something that's really come back much more so in version 6. As well, we've really focused on improving the performance and scale. This is, again, something that we heard from the Samvera community that was a concern, particularly with the last version. So something that we've made some improvements on, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on these points in a moment. We've also added a built-in search endpoint. So previously in version 4 and 5, you had to hook up an external index to do any kind of searching. Now there is a simple search API that you can use to do synchronous queries. And I think fairly importantly, we've made fairly minimal API changes, in part to make it easier to adopt and migrate to this latest version. Clients don't have to change their software very much to move from version 4 or 5 to version 6. And finally, the intent is to make migrations not only easier, but less frequent in the future. And a big part of that is one of these standards that we've chosen to adopt. And I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but the Oxford Common File layout is a standard we've adopted. It's really just kind of an open standard approach to how you can organize the contents of your repository on disk in a fairly simple file and folder layout that is beneficial towards digital preservation best practices. And so by complying with this standard, our intention is that future versions of Fedora won't need to do massive data migrations because those new versions will comply with this kind of format that things are being stored at on disk. So you won't need to sort of export and import all your content over and over again to do these upgrades in the future. So just a few points of some of these new features and benefits that we think might be of interest. Those that followed Fedora development and are familiar with version 4 and 5 might know that ModeShape was the piece of open source software that we used as the persistence layer of the software. That has been replaced in version 6 with a more simple persistence layer that we've designed that's based on the Oxford Common File Layout, or OCFL. We've also added a configurable database index that sits on top of that. And we've made it much easier now to collect metrics and performance data by integrating Prometheus and Grafana, so you can set up kind of a nice dashboard and monitor performance. We've also developed a number of Apache JMeter scripts and other kind of testing scripts so that people that want to validate that Fedora does perform adequately can now do so in a way that was much more challenging in the past. The built-in search, this was again something that particularly developers were asking for some time. It has been added now. It's not intended to replace a fully fledged search service like Solr or Elasticsearch. Really, it's more for development and being able to kind of get queries that are synchronous with the repository, rather than having to rely on an external index, which can be a bit of a pain if you're developing. And a number of database options are supported here. So just very quickly, sort of the current status of where we are with development. In December, we released Fedora 6 as an alpha. We went through a couple of alphas, and then around the end of February, we released Fedora 6 beta. We're currently in the beta phase. Testing has been going well. All of the features are in, and we're at the moment just kind of doing a lot of testing, making some performance optimizations and things like that before we do a full release, which we do hope to have out by the midway point of the year, so by the end of June. So far, that's still looking good, unless we encounter any major issues that would force us to sort of hit the pause button on the release roadmap. But otherwise, you should be able to expect a full Fedora 6.0 release by about the midway point in the year. I thought I would just highlight a couple of things that are notable from the testing we've done so far that might be of interest, again, particularly to the Samvera community. Islandora, of course, is another framework that uses Fedora, and they've already done a lot of work. The Islandora version 8 had been running on top of Fedora version 4, and then it was upgraded to 5. It has since been upgraded to support version 6 out of the box, and I'm happy to be able to report that that process was fairly smooth, again, because the API really hasn't changed very much between version 5 and 6. There was a small change I think they had to make with e-tags, but otherwise it was pretty smooth sailing, and that's now been integrated without any further issues. Some of you might be aware that the Berlin State Library runs a Samvera application. I don't have all the details here, but Oliver Schoner, who's a community member, is also a Fedora user and attended a Fedora user group meeting that we held for folks in European time zones a few weeks back, and talked about his experience so far with doing some test migrations using the tools that we've developed to move from a Fedora 4, I think it was a 4.6 instance, all the way up to Fedora 6.0 using the beta, and had to make some small configuration updates, but largely that process was successful. I was talking to Oliver about this. I encouraged him to submit something for this particular event because I didn't want to speak on his behalf, but he's on vacation at the moment, so he just gave me a few details so that I could pass it on to all of you. But I do hope that he's able to give a fuller presentation for the Samvera community in the not too distant future, because I think it's just a good example of some early testing that shows some promise with this latest version of Fedora. I believe some initial testing has also occurred with the Valkyrie component, but not with the full stack of or the full suite, I should say, of Samvera applications. In tandem with this, we are pursuing a grant project that we received from the Institute of Museum and Library Services that's taking place over 18 months. This started in September. And the focus here is on supporting migrations from version 3 to 6 of Fedora, which is where the majority of the community sits right now. But fortunately, just because of this grant funding, we've been able to put a lot of time and effort into improving all of our migration tooling and our documentation to help the community move forward. So this project has been very beneficial, and it kind of serves the overall program goals as we try to bring the community forward from all previous versions of the software to a modern and supported version of Fedora. And of course, none of this would be possible without our members. I think many of you know that Fedora is a member-supported, community-based open source program. We have many members from all over the world, and I want to say thank you to all those members. It makes staffing on the program possible, and helps us be able to put out regular software releases, and also to offer support for all of the things that are coming out of the grant as we produce toolkits and documentation and robust migration tooling. Once that funding ends, we still want to be able to support all of these efforts into the future. So I just want to say a thank you to all of the members that support us. And for anyone that's not currently a member but using Fedora and finding value out of the software, I'd certainly encourage you to support us. So with that, I want to turn things over to Aaron to talk a little bit about some of the related things we're doing with community engagement.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. I'm Erin. As David mentioned, I'm the program coordinator here at Fedora. My pronouns are she, her. Since joining Fedora, I spent a lot of time at the beginning organizing our communication pieces and working to formalize some kind of system for our community engagement. We had a lot of pieces all over the place, and we weren't really clear on the direction we wanted to be headed in. Especially with Fedora 6 so close to production release, it was really important to us to be able to demonstrate to the community that we were aligned in our message and that we were here to support them through the adoption of this new software. So David and I were actually fortunate enough to be able to partner with Heather right here at Samvera while creating our communication strategy. And collaboratively, we were able to draw on some of the best practices seen within this community to help guide our actions. So we formalized a monthly communication strategy that leveraged multiple high return platforms to reach users at a bunch of different levels. So we were focusing not just on tech users, but non-tech as well. So being new to this industry, I actually saw an opportunity to try to engage more people by generating more high-level content for those who aren't as heavily involved in Fedora, but may be interested in learning more. So we've attempted to reach them through the creation of some different content than we'd been creating in the past. We've also been able to try some really fun new engagement activities. Over the holidays, we did a little holiday trivia that we called Festive Fedora Frenzy. It was a fun little activity, and people have been, seeming to enjoy it. So the response to our consolidated plan has been nothing but positive, and the community has valued from the regular communication that we're sending, and they've actually been coming to rely on the regular updates that we send them. And then I just wanted to share really briefly here, this is actually the monthly communication strategy that we created. I won't go into each piece in great detail here, but essentially it just lays out every regular piece of communication that we have, that we committed to sending to the community. It shows who's responsible for creating it, who's responsible for sending it, and what audience it's intended for. So from the community side for us here, we have some plans for the future, and there's a few things that we really want to focus on. Obviously, with the official release of Fedora 6, we plan to hold a launch party to celebrate all the successes we've achieved to reach the goal of releasing it. It's really all about thanking everyone who was involved in the process the entire way along, seeing as we absolutely couldn't have made it to this point without them. The other thing that we want to do is we just wrapped up 2 of our spring user group meetings. So we held 2 of them to accommodate our users in different time zones. So we had one for the European time zones and one for North American. They were very well attended, and from them, we've been seeing some really great and productive conversations in our communication channels around the migrations and different institutional specific user stories. So that's been really beneficial to us in kind of understanding how our users are working with Fedora. And lastly, we have committed to hosting quarterly training sessions. So our first one was an Intro to Fedora workshop that we held last month, and it was hugely successful. We plan to hold additional workshops geared at different skill levels so that we can provide the community some hands-on help, especially as we move closer to Fedora 6 release. And likely we'll be holding some more fun community engagement activities again soon. People always love prizes, so that's something that we try to incorporate. And it also gets people thinking about Fedora a little bit differently. So anything that we can do to keep Fedora kind of top of mind for our users and for the community, because that's ultimately who we're here for and what we're doing this. It's about our users and the community. You know, we've really worked hard to make them feel supported and ensure that everyone is getting what they need from us. So with that, I'll pass back to David, and he can get you all the info on the resources and links and whatnot.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And it's been great having Erin on the program. She joined, I think, just about 6 months ago, just bringing some kind of fresh ideas, particularly around community engagement and communications that I think have been a real benefit. And just to kind of close things off here, we're very interested in continuing to get testing for Fedora, and particularly from the Samvera community, to the extent possible. And there's lots of ways to do that. There is a beta release that is testable in a variety of ways, including local builds and a Docker image. We have some pretty good migration documentation, and we'll share these slides out with the links so folks can follow them. But we have some documentation for migrating from each previous version from 3 and 4 and 5. And would really love feedback on these migration paths and what we can do to improve them. We do also have a variety of performance and scale tests, and for folks with some concerns around making sure Fedora hits certain benchmarks, we'd love to get your feedback either for running the tests or even just letting us know what those benchmarks are so we can run them and make sure the software meets the needs. And of course, you can always support us by becoming a member if you haven't already. But that's we'll wrap things up there. Our contact emails are there if anyone would like to get in touch with us. But it's really all we wanted to share today. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at this event. And yeah, I think we probably have a couple minutes if anyone does have any questions that we can answer.
Thank you very much, David, Aaron. I don't see any question on the Q&A box yet. And checking on the Slack, you know, there are a few comments on how good is the Fedora 6 supports in Valkyrie, the testing Fedora, but I think apart from that, we don't have any other questions.
Okay, I mean, I could pop in the Slack and see if there's any I can answer by text as well. I'll certainly do that.
Thank you very much again. So we came to the end of our day one. So let me also just put our at least thank you slide, and just to, I hope you see my screen at the moment. So this is just to thank everyone joining us during the day for the day one again, and hoping to see you tomorrow for more of these interesting discussions and presentations at the same time.